What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so The Drowned is one of the coolest stories from Dark Knight's Metal. All these one-shots are so amazing in terms of like giving us these evil versions of Batman. So the cool thing about this is that this centers on what's actually Batwoman, and it's a person by the name of Brice Wayne. And so it's kind of interesting because what this does is it initially picks up with the idea that Brice was in a relationship with a person named Sylvester Kyle. Now, we're not explicitly told who Sylvester Kyle is. We're just kind of told that this person was the love interest of Brice Wayne at the time. But unlike the other, one-shots that we've seen so far, this one actually picks up after Brice has already arrived in the main DC universe. Now, one thing to keep in mind is all of these one-shots spin out of Dark Knight's Metal #2, which is one of the things that we're going to reference once we cover that story. But the origin story is still standalone. But her arriving in Amnesty Bay, which is basically one of the home bases of operations of Arthur Curry of Aquaman, leads her into direct conflict with Aquaman and with Mira. Now, we will get the whole backstory, but one thing that I want to talk about here for a second is the nature of Amnesty Bay. When it comes to the Aquaman mythos, there is Atlantis and then there's Amnesty Bay. Atlantis is the kingdom of Atlantis. It's basically Aquaman's birthright for the most part, in the sense that he was born as the heir to Atlantis itself. However, he was raised in Amnesty Bay, and that's why he has this sort of dichotomy between a loyalty to the Justice League and somewhat to the protection of the world overall, but loyalty to Atlantis, because for him, it's very much like Thor. Thor's like, okay, look, yes, I'm an Avenger, yada, 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 but Asgard first, everything else second. If it comes down to it, I will abandon Earth and I will go only to Asgard and rule as king because that's my job, that's what I do first. Aquaman's much the same way. The other half of that is that Aquaman will protect both with an absolute fury. Woe betide the poor soul who shows up in Atlantis starting trouble. But the whole backstory to this comes by way of the explanation of Brice Wayne herself, in the sense that somewhere along the line, the various metahumans on Earth -11 in her own reality in the Dark Multiverse, somewhere along the line, they had killed Sylvester Kyle. Now, we don't know why. We're kind of left to believe maybe that they were criminals or something along those lines, because the implication is that Brice, as Batwoman, was a crime fighter. She fought bad guys. And so the implication is that in this scenario, Sylvester was killed by some rogue metas, and in her vengeance and in her mourning, she killed everyone. And so it's basically the Batman comparison. Bruce Wayne lost his parents, she lost her husband. And so it's cool to see those two things go alongside each other because it shows the nature of grief itself. Now, the other half of this is following the death of Sylvester and the deaths of all these metahumans at the hands of Brice herself. About 18 months after this had happened, Aquaman had effectively just shown up. All the metahumans are dead. We want to have peace talks. We want to come to peace with the service world itself. Now, again, this is another aspect that we're not really given. In the main DC universe, Atlanteans aren't really like xenophobic so much as they are retreatists, in the sense that they're basically like, you stay away, we stay away, everything will be fine. But for Brice, because of the fact that she had experienced such a traumatic loss, much like Batman, who doesn't trust anybody but himself, she doesn't trust anybody but herself. And in her mind, she believed that Atlantis was pulling a ruse, that Atlantis had seen the deaths of all the metahumans and then said, hearken alas, no one can protect the surface from us if we choose to invade. But if we just jump in and immediately start going to war, there'll be casualties on both sides. So we'll play it diplomatic at first, and then when they're at their weakest, we'll conquer them. Brice believed that was the case. And so in her anger, ultimately the peace talks fell to pieces, and then Brice chose the surface world and waged war against Atlantis, and in doing so, killed Aquawoman with her own trident. Now, following this, because of the fact that the response of the Atlanteans to the death of their queen was to drown the entirety of Gotham City, this pushed Brice even further. And so I hope you guys are starting to see a pattern here. This scenario where Brice lost someone she cared about to one or more metahumans. In response, in her wrath and in her anger and in her mourning, she killed them all. This in turn led to Atlantis stepping in and saying, let's have peace talks. The peace talks fell apart. And again, in her just altered state of mind, not rationally thinking, she just waged war against everybody. And so ultimately this leads to her modifying her body on the genetic level, giving herself all kinds of alterations, basically making herself an Atlantean, but in turn modifying her existing abilities. For example, when it comes to the concept of Batman, we're largely left to believe that he's just a really, really good fighter. I mean, that's really what Batman is. He's a normal guy that's just really good at fighting. He knows all these different martial arts, things like that. With Brice, we're left to believe that's the same way. We're just kind of left to believe that she's just a woman who's really capable. Making these modifications to her body means she's taking the war directly to Atlantis, and when she does, she has to be able to fight on their battlefield. It's the perfect complement to Sun Tzu's The Art of War. If you have to wage a war on your terms, but if you have to wage a war on their terms, be prepared. And that's exactly what she does. She basically starts modifying her body with these genetic modifications. She gives herself the ability to breathe underwater. She can move faster than any of the Atlanteans. She's pushed herself to the absolute brink. And so when the time comes, not only was she able to wage war against Atlantis and basically kill all the Atlanteans, she had done so with the help of what's called the Deadwater, basically her own genetically modified forces that can in turn serve on her behalf. Now, the implication here and the way this seems to be pointed is that somewhere along the line, she had basically started capturing forces, bolstering her numbers, and then modifying them genetically. We're not explicitly told that, but it looks like these are just twisted versions of Atlanteans. And so the result is that she basically used Atlanteans, assuming that she did anyway, to destroy Atlanteans, ultimately killing off the entire Atlantic community and then taking up residence in Atlantis herself. Following this, she drowned the entire world, killed everybody on Earth, just destroyed everybody on Earth. It's absolutely bonkers in terms of how it comes out. And so in response to this, should there have been anybody out there who was wayward, anybody out there who was looking for solace, she put up a beacon in the sky to show them where to go. Now, this gets into the true and really the terrifying nature of Brice herself in the sense that that beacon was not done for altruistic purposes. She did that so that anybody who came across her path, they would be added to her roster of soldiers. They would become another member of her army. They would be genetically modified and they would be transformed into one of her own. But in the middle of all this, and at some point later on down the line, the beacon suddenly went off. And when it did, she was met with the Man Who Laughs. Now, the Man Who Laughs, in my opinion, is one of the most anticipated origin stories in all of Dark Knight's Metal. I am so looking forward to that. And I think a lot of people are. Like, a lot of people are really excited for the Man Who Laughs. And there's so many theories, because the best theory I've seen so far is that the Man Who Laughs comes from a universe where Batman actually killed the Joker during the events of the Killing Joke. And then Batman became the Joker. That's the best theory that I've heard. I think it's the most popular one going around the internet right now. But, you know, very rarely do I ever see a theory take hold like this. I saw it with Mr. Oz, saw it with The Watchmen. DC Rebirth is just setting the world on fire with the stories they're writing. Jesus Christ. It's amazing. But the fact remains here, with regards to Brice showing up and facing off against Aquaman and Mira, you have Mira with her, you know, aquakinesis, the ability to manipulate water using her mind. But it's almost like the Thanos Infinity Gauntlet versus Thanos with the Heart of the Universe concept, in the sense that with the Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos was manipulating the universe itself. With the Heart of the Universe, he was the universe. And that's exactly what's happening here. Where Mira is able to, you know, psychically manipulate the water, Brice is the water. Like, she just controls it. It's like an arm or a leg. It's an inherent part of who she is. Now, all this is designed to do is basically say that Brice's control over water is stronger than Mira's control over water. That's all that means. I mean, it doesn't mean that Brice is actually made of water. It just means that her control is far more powerful than Mira's is. But the significance of this is that it gives us a character that overpowers both Aquaman and Mira. And this is a big deal, because remember, when it comes to Aquaman, he can stand toe-to-toe to Superman. I mean, we saw that in Aquaman Rebirth. Like, we saw that in that first story. He went toe-to-toe with Superman and held his own. So it's not like Aquaman's just a really strong guy who talks to fish. Not at all. This guy is a wrecking crew. He's a one-man army. And so to have someone from, you know, to have this Brice chick genetically modify herself and then show up and not only beat a guy who amounts to an underwater version of Superman and then crush his wife who controls water is insane, because it means this person is not someone to be trifled with. Not only that, the idea of a person becoming a Deadwater is basically an action that's undertaken by Brice herself when she physically transforms the body of Mira. Now, I would argue this is not a permanent thing, that the process can most likely be reversed, especially if it's just an alteration to the chemical structure of the body. But the fact remains, Mira is effectively a henchman of Brice now, and that's how this unfolds, is because it leads to Aquaman seeming to be the last man standing in the face of Brice, all her Deadwater soldiers, and Mira having been transformed into one, which leads, as it always does with these one-shots, with Dr. Fate intervening. Now again, Dr. Fate is a character character that predates Doctor Strange by quite a bit, but the characters are effectively one and the same in terms of how they function and what they do. What Dr. Fate is doing here is really more akin to like what Doctor Strange was doing during Infinity Gauntlet, but the fact remains that Dr. Fate's basically grabbing these various heroes who are encountering these dark nights of Barbados and then whisking them away to a safe place so they can remuster their forces and then go back into the onslaught again to plan ahead. And so that's effectively what happens. This symbol is sent out into the sky by Brice in order to attract anybody who's either curious or looking for some kind of refuge of some sort, and then ultimately bolster her own army using those individuals. So again, another origin story, another Dark Knight cropping up, another character with an extreme level of power who's basically able to dominate some of the most powerful heroes in DC Comics. And so again, it's cool. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.